Diversity of tattooing is so great. Some tribes only tattoo their face, some only for like as their tribal mark. In other cases, it's just the torso, the shoulders, the legs. There's all these tribal identifier marks. There's all these rite of passage marks. There's all these spiritual tattoos related to, again, traveling to the afterlife. There's certain tattoos that enabled you to successfully make that journey. And then there are other tattoos, really rare ones. There's only one person that wears this tattoo today, is a tiger spirit tattoo. My name is Lars Krutak. I'm a tattoo anthropologist. And so for 20 plus years, I've been traveling the indigenous world, documenting some of the world's rarest tattoos, some of the world's oldest tattoos, and preserving that information for future generations in some cases, these tattoos will disappear in the next generation. But it's really important because if there are going to be revivals in the future, it might take a generation or two, at least there'll be a baseline for people to go back to start reviving these ancient patterns and motifs and the stories behind the tattoos, because every tattoo that I study has a story to tell. So I started this research when I was a graduate student in the mid-90s at the University of Alaska, and I worked with a small group of Yupik people on this island called St. Lawrence Island in Bering Strait, and there were about 12 tattooed women still living in their 90s, more or less, and there was still one tattoo artist who was almost 100. But they were the last generation of tattoo bearers, and all of their tattoos were made with thread and needle. They were stitched into the skin. It's really painful, slow, methodical technique. I've actually experienced it myself. I realized at that time that seemingly no one was interested in telling their stories of tattoo because they're pretty much like biographies. You could read a lot about these women's lives if you knew the vocabulary of how to read their tattoos in their body. And so I started thinking, well, how many other places in the indigenous world where I was basically witnessing the last generation of tattoo bearers, 2,000 years of tattoo history is going to disappear on this island probably in the next 10 years. How many other places like this was this going on around the indigenous world? So I started to travel and started to find ways to make money so I could travel to go find more of these extremely rare and important aspects of our humanity's shared cultural expressions, our cultural heritage that seemingly no one was interested in. And that's what I've been doing for almost 25 years. Asia, Africa, every Papua New Guinea, every habitable continent, I've conducted research. And the important aspect is to put it into some kind of a form that you can disseminate, namely books, and then give it back to the community. So that's really important. My research is sharing. I could never do this research if it were not for the permission and the interest of these communities I work with, and especially elders, because typically speaking, I'm working with people's grandparents, because they are, in many cases, the last generation of tattoo bearers. In some cases, I've worked with many individuals who were the last individuals who carried specific tattoos, that when they pass away, they're gone forever. So the oldest evidence of tattooing that is known to this day is Ötzi the Iceman, who was found melting out of a glacier in Europe in 1991. He's covered in over 60 tattoos. They're linear, geometric, more or less. There's one cruciform, so you could call that a figurative tattoo, but it's basically geometric. And we believe the majority of those tattoos were related to complaints like illnesses, mainly arthritis, rheumatism. And so scholars believe, I do too, that a lot of these tattoos had some kind of medicinal therapy, something akin to like acupuncture, because they were placed at primary joints. And when they conducted CT scans of his body and other studies, he was racked by arthritis. And a lot of these tattoos, of course, the ones on his lower spine, he couldn't auto-tattoo himself. So somebody obviously placed those tattoos at those locations. And because they're so dark, it's believed that he received these tattoo treatments, if you will, multiple times over the course of his life because he suffered from these long-standing complaints. Now, medicinal tattooing has been understudied. I've been studying it for 20-something years. I encountered it on St. Lawrence Island, medicinal tattooing of the joints. When I was there, that's just one form of tattooing that I encountered on St. Lawrence Island. There are many others. And then, of course, across the indigenous world, almost everybody invariably I've interviewed I've heard this in every continent, is that tattoos are believed by most people to be the only possessions you can take with you into the afterlife. None of your possessions you can take with you in the afterlife, but your tattoos travel with your spiritual essence there. And the reason why that is important is because there in the afterworld, your ancestors can recognize you by the tattoos that you wear because you were marked like an ideal person, a member of that community with a unique tribal mark or signature, whatever you want to call it, so that you could be reunited with your ancestors. And this is a very strong indigenous spiritual belief, like I said, that I've interviewed elders from Papua New Guinea to Nagaland in India, to Mozambique, to everywhere in between, that tattooing has this lasting power that travels with you after you pass away. One of the places that I've worked at probably the most is in Nagaland. So this is a sort of semi-autonomous state in the northeastern part of India and also borders into northwestern Myanmar. It's very remote, but the diversity of tattooing there is incredible. There are more than 30 indigenous Naga tribes that inhabit this sort of mountainous, hilly area. At one time, there's still tigers roaming around. In some places there still are, so it's pretty wild. But of those 30 plus tribes, there are over 20 that tattooed at one point in time. And there's still, one generation left of these elders in many of those tribes. But the diversity of tattooing is so great. Some tribes only tattoo their face. Some only as their tribal mark. In other cases, it's just the torso, the shoulders, the legs. There's all these tribal identifier marks. There's all these rite of passage marks. There's all these spiritual tattoos related to, again, traveling to the afterlife. There's certain tattoos that enabled you to successfully make that journey. And then there are other tattoos, really rare ones. There's only one person that wears this tattoo today, is a tiger spirit tattoo. And that was placed on the back of these sort of high aristocratic status men. And these were inherited down through the family line. And what they represented were the stripes that were worn on a tiger. So when these individuals became sort of, a member of one of these particular lineages that carried these tattoos, you had a spiritual counterpart who was a tiger that lived in the forest. And so when you had a vision or a dream, you could communicate with the spiritual essence of this tiger relation or counterpart, so that in times of warfare, you could track the movements of your enemies, you could see where their camps were, and ultimately these tips that you were given through these visions would enable your community or your village to defeat your enemies. However, if you weren't strong enough to control that spirit, you could ultimately be driven crazy and may die. And that has been documented, actually, at least to me. And the other thing is, if somebody killed or wounded your tiger familiar spirit, you would also be injured in some similar way. So if somebody killed that tiger, you would probably get ill, become sick, and ultimately die as well. But these beliefs still exist, but there's only one tattoo bearer with this particular tattoo left. There were two others, but they passed away last year. And so that's got to be one of the rarest tattoos, I think, on Earth. And once this individual's gone, those ceremonies, they don't have the spiritual practitioners to carry out those ceremonies, to indoctrinate those individuals, to offer the particular offerings to these spirits. So probably once this person is gone, that tattooing tradition will become extinct, because there's no one left to conduct those ceremonies or to make the tattoos, because there really are no living tattoo artists in this particular Naga tribe. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of friends that are cultural tattoo practitioners, and they have a heavy weight on their shoulders, just because they're carrying, all those ancestral practices on their shoulders and bringing it to the next generations and the generations to come. It's a heavy cultural weight to bear, because they want to do it in a respectful way. There's so much ancient knowledge and wisdom embodied within these tattoo traditions, but you don't want to appropriate something like these tiger spirit tattoos. Like, nobody should be wearing a tiger spirit tattoo unless you've actually earned the right and gone through the particular ceremony. So that's why, in some cases, some tattoos will probably never come back, because there's not a proper context to receive them, to earn them. Because every tattoo that I've ever researched was earned. It wasn't freely given. You got to remember that too. It's not like, you just pop in and say, I want a tattoo. No, in many cases, most of the warrior societies I've worked with, you had to take another person's life before you could become tattooed to be an ideal man. And of course, to be marked as a proper woman, as an ideal woman, there are various, like weaving or keeping your household or children, family, spiritual practices, because there are a lot of women that were healers, medicinal specialists, that had to sort of earn the right to be tattooed before they could, bear those particular marks. So yeah, we just have to remember that, the tattooing profession has ancient roots, and we should pay our respect and our homage. And I think we should learn as much as we can about it. Because after all, it's everywhere now. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? So we need to not forget about the rootedness of where tattooing came from, so that we can move forward, so we know where we're going, right? So I think it's really important to be grounded in the history and to educate yourself more about the ancient origins, the rootedness to culture of tattoos. I would like to say that, this is a really important moment in time. Of course, 20 years ago, I've been doing as much as I can myself the last 20 plus years, but there's still many other indigenous groups where there's really important information that can be documented and recorded. And anybody can go out there and do it. Some people are doing it in their own communities, of course. But I think more should be done, more like by like the National Science Foundation or UNESCO. But are they doing anything? No, because I think there's still a stigma attached to tattooing. That's one of the main problems. And I've had a lot of trouble over the course of my research finding funding. So I pretty much have self-funded most of my research, with the exception of one particular family foundation that has supported me on 5 or so trips. But there's still so much more that can be done. There's so many more tattoo stories. There's still a lot of tattooed elders out there that want to share their stories, because there's definitely genuine interest. I know I've never been turned away from any communities I've worked in. I've been met with somewhat open arms, and I spend as much time as I can in those communities. And like I said, it's important to build trust and return to these places, so that you can, record as much as you possibly can before it's too late.